First of all, welcome everybody. It is fantastic to have so much interest in this project as we launch these data sets over the next couple of weeks. So thank you everybody for your time, taking this time out in your days to find out more about the work that we've been doing together with National Infrastructure Commission and the Committee on Climate Change. So the purpose of this session today is to update the group on a piece of work that's been going on for the last 18 months or so, and let you know what science we've been up to, and how you're able to access a new set of data sets that hopefully will be useful to people in modeling future energy systems. I would like to try and do a quick roundtable just so we all know who's in the room. The other thing I was just going to say is we're recording this session, so please bear that in mind. The reason why we're recording it is that a number of people have expressed interest but were unable to make the session, so wanted to have the session available afterwards. So just introducing myself and other members of the team. My name is Tom Butcher. I head up our research and consultancy propositions area at the Met Office. I've been involved in this project pretty much from the start, not quite from the start, but pretty much from the start in terms of understanding user requirements and working with the team to deliver on the initiative. Laura, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Laura Dawkins. I am a statistical scientist at the Met Office, and I was involved in kind of the science and the development of the data set that we're presenting to you today.
Emily?
Hi, I actually win the prize for being involved in the project the longest, I'm pleased to say. So I had the initial calls with NIC around the need for this piece of work, and I've been sitting in the background for some of this work and playing a sort of quality assurance role with Laura and the team on the data they've produced.
And then we've got Megan.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Pearce. I'm a scientific consultant at the Met Office, and I was involved with sort of some of the later phases of the project so far, particularly involving sort of the climate projection science.
And the last member of the Met Office team is Isabel.
Hi everyone, I'm Isabel Rushby. I'm a foundation scientist at the Met Office, and I've also been working on the science for this project, a lot of the statistical kind of parts of it.
And the other two members of the sort of the project team are the two sort of sponsors here. So we've got Joe Campbell.
Hi, good to have you all here today. So I'm Assistant Director at the National Infrastructure Commission and oversee our work on energy and climate change.
And Owen Bellamy.
Hi everyone, I'm Owen Bellamy. So I'm head of the power sector team at the Climate Change Committee.
Okay, I was going to get everybody else to introduce, but we're up to 40, and I think that would take the whole meeting. So I think what we'll move on now. But thank you everybody for coming along to this session. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just to give you a flavour of what we intend to cover today, we're in the introductions now. I've nearly done that bit, so we're on track. We'll then move to Joe and Owen, who are going to give us a bit of background to the project from their perspectives. And then we're going to spend a bit of time going through some slides to introduce you to the project and the work that we've been doing to develop this data set. We're allowing quite a lot of space afterwards for a Q&A, so if you can save your questions. I think also use the chat function as well. So if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, then that's fine. Sometimes that's quite useful. If you like a question, you can give it a thumbs up, and if we've got a lot of questions, then we'll know which ones to handle first. If we don't get through all the questions, we can of course continue the conversation afterwards via email. So and also that's true if you reflect on what we've said over the next few days and you have more questions for the team, then please do get in touch afterwards. Then the sort of final step of the agenda is just to introduce you to where the data can be found. The data is published now, so they're accessible to you directly after this session, and I'll summarise with some of the next steps in the project so that everybody knows where things are heading. So without any further ado, what I'll do now is hand off to Joe and Owen, who are just going to give us a little sort of 2-minute introduction to the project and where this has started and where we've been going.
Thanks very much, Tom. So we started working with the Met Office back in 2019. As Emily says, there was some initial conversations. They may even have been in 2018 and before my time. And the idea was to explore what was known and what wasn't about weather and climate-related sensitivities and risks associated with a highly renewable electricity system. So the Met Office first carried out a review of existing studies for us. This highlighted the electricity system resilience opportunities associated with utilising some insights related to spatial and temporal variability in relevant meteorological conditions, so namely wind speed and solar irradiance. But it also found that there was a lack of analysis of extreme stress events and limited evidence of how climate change is being accounted for. So, as I'm sure you're aware, moving to a highly renewables electricity system that will rely on weather through increasing volumes of wind and solar is a key pillar of the National Infrastructure Commission's position on energy policy. So as electricity systems become more reliant on renewable generation, it's clearly important that we build our understanding of the impact that weather, and in particular extremes in weather, might have. And a better understanding can support, obviously, the design and operation of the system. So we and the Climate Change Committee have worked with the Met Office to build a representative data set for these extreme stress events, with the intention that they could be widely used by you guys, so the energy system modelling community. These data sets represent plausible but extreme weather scenarios that can be applied to electricity system models used across industry, government and others. So the value in these data sets is to increase confidence that modelling used to inform both policy and investment decisions are resilient to a range of plausible extreme weather scenarios. And as Megan says, one of the things she's been working on is the sort of the important factor of trying to capture plausible but like future conditions or scenarios, so trying to account for climate change in the data sets that are being produced. So as well as this work tackling an important topic as the UK seeks to decarbonise its electricity system, we also think this project is also a great example of driving to achieve transparency and consistency in the way resilience is tested through different modelling approaches. So that's why the intention from the start of this project has been to make sure that the data provided is open to all and becomes widely used. So obviously really pleased you can all join us today to hear more about the work and get an understanding of how you might use this in your own work. Owen, I shall pass on to you next.
Thanks, Jo. I just want to say a couple of words really just about the kind of wider importance of this project and how it fits in, I guess, to the kind of climate change kind of strategy. So obviously in the UK we have some very challenging targets now for emissions reduction. So we need to get to 100% below 1990 levels by 2050. And based on the Climate Change Committee's advice, the government have just legislated a target to reduce emissions by 80% below 1990 levels by the mid-2030s, which is obviously only kind of less than 15 years away. Within that, I guess electricity generation and power is one of the most, or probably the most strategically important sector for emissions reduction. Partly because it, because it enables essentially electrification, low carbon electrification of all the other sectors of the economy. So I guess it's really important from that perspective, but also it's probably the earliest sector as well to decarbonise. So within the committee's advice, the recommendation is for the power sector to be fully decarbonised by 2035. Again, less than 15 years away. So although we've made kind of great strides over the last decade, and power has probably been the most successful sector, there's some big challenges to come. And a key part of that is moving the electricity system to be a renewables-based electricity system. And obviously, renewables are weather dependent, and we know that climate change is going to have some impacts on the climate and weather kind of over the long term. So I think exploring the effects that climate change, and particularly the climate change we are already committed to, and the implications that might have for a kind of weather-dependent electricity system are going to be really important, which is why I'm really pleased we've done this project. So hopefully the rest of the session will explain a bit more about what we've done and how it can fit into your work.
Thanks, Owen. Could I just briefly come in, Tom, before you move on, just to also say, just use this as an opportunity to say thank you to our advisory group. I think some members are on the meeting today. They've been supporting us in developing these data sets, bringing both their industry and modelling knowledge to the project. So that's been really valuable. So thank you to those that have taken the time out over the last 2 years, really, to do that. And obviously very important to thank the Met Office team that are all on the call today. They're the ones putting in all the hard graft to get us to this point. So I shall pass on so you can hear from them.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you, Owen. Yeah, and a good pick up with the about the advisory group. So thank you for that. So I'll now hand over to Laura and the other members of the project team who are going to give us an overview of the project development work that has happened to date.
Great, thank you. I should be able to change the slides. There we go. So what am I clicking? Sorry, hold on a sec. Okay, so yeah, so today we're going to spend a little bit of time presenting to you about how we developed the data set that we're kind of releasing, and first of all, just to show you what the data set contains. So we're calling this data set the Adverse Weather Scenarios for Future Electricity Systems data set. And what it contains is time slices, so full years of meteorological data on a daily 60-kilometre gridded resolution for surface temperature, 100-metre wind speed, and surface solar radiation. And that gridded information is covering a European domain. So this data then contains within it long duration adverse weather events, and that's characterizing 3 different types of events, and we'll go into a bit more detail in a minute about how we've kind of characterized these events. But essentially they're called kind of wintertime wind drought peak demand events. So that's when we've got low wind speeds, so low wind generation but high demand. And then summertime equivalent, so summertime wind drought peak demand events, and then also we're capturing summertime surplus generation events, so when we've got kind of more generation and then there is demand. These events that we're sharing are both focused on the UK and then Europe as a whole. And we are sharing events at different extreme levels. So those expected to occur once every 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 and 100 years in terms of their duration and their severity. And again, we'll explain a bit more about how we calculate that later. And then we're doing this for 5 different climate warming levels. So the current day climate, and then 1.5, 2, 3, and 4 degrees above the pre-industrial global mean temperature. And all of this data is available currently to download from the CEDA archive. So just to summarise the steps that we've taken in producing the data set. So first of all, we needed to develop a method for characterising and identifying these adverse weather scenarios within any kind of suitable gridded meteorological data set. And we do that using the ERA5 reanalysis data set. We then employ a number of additional data sources so that we can better represent climate variability and climate change within the final data set. And this requires some data calibration. So we undertook a number of data calibration sort of processes. We then identified adverse weather events within each of those data sources and used them together within a statistical extreme value analysis, which allowed us to quantify kind of the extremity of different events. So what is a 1 in 100-year event? What does that look like in terms of its duration and severity? And how does that change with the warming level? And then finally, this information from the statistical analysis allowed us to pick out representative events from the data set for the data set. So we could pick out what is a 1 in 100-year event in terms of this type of event in this warming level. So now I'll hand over to Isabel, who's going to talk to you about how we characterise the adverse weather scenarios.
Thanks, Laura. So adverse weather scenarios occur when electricity generation and demand are high or low. So, for example, a long duration wind drought peak demand adverse weather scenario would occur within a region when wind speed and therefore the wind renewable electricity generation is low. And when temperature is low in winter or high in summer, which leads to high heating or high cooling demand. And this would mean that the demand net of renewables is high. And these conditions must also persist for a long time, so over a number of days. And then equivalently for surplus generation scenarios, this is when renewables net of demand is high. So we developed a method for calculating daily demand net of renewables and renewables net of demand and based this upon ERA5 data. So we can characterize events using a wind drought peak demand index, or WDI, which is the demand net of renewables accumulated over a number of days, or surplus generation index, which is the renewables net of demand accumulated over a number of days. And we identify an event as occurring when the wind drought index or surplus generation index is above a high threshold. So first, to go from weather to electricity demand, we follow the approach of Bloomfield et al. So for each day, we calculated the average temperature over land in the region. So for example, the UK, using gridded temperature data. We then used the national demand model to calculate weather-dependent demand associated with that temperature. So we use a different national demand model for each European country, and these models are taken from Bloomfield et al. So the UK, for example, has a heating slope in the model of 0.75, and this means that for every 1 degree decrease below 15.5 degrees, there would be a 0.75 gigawatt increase in demand. So you can read off the regional average temperature in a given day to get the regional demand on that day. And then if you repeat this for every day of the data set, you get a time series of weather dependent demand. Then to estimate wind electricity generation from wind speeds, we bias correct 100 meter gridded wind speed data using the Global Wind Atlas. And then if you take the wind speed in each grid cell and calculate the wind capacity factor for that grid cell using the assigned wind turbine power curve, which is chosen to be the one that would kind of maximize the wind generation in that grid cell, using some representative wind curves from Bloomfield et al. And then also using a different type of turbine for offshore as well. So then if you take the wind speed on a given day for that grid cell, you can work out the capacity factor for it. So then to calculate the wind generation across the whole region, we multiply the wind capacity factor in each of the grid cells by the installed wind capacity weighting, and then we aggregate this over the whole region and multiply it by the regional total installed wind capacity. So to work out the wind capacity weightings, we have to take into account the potential location of wind turbines, and we do this using the research of Price et al. For Great Britain and the offshore areas around the UK, to kind of say where wind turbines could possibly be located in the future. And then less research has been done into this across the rest of Europe. So we kind of said that wind turbines could be placed anywhere that's not an urban area for this region. And then we assumed a total installed capacity of 120 gigawatts for the UK and 600 for the whole of Europe. And then this process is repeated for each day to get a time series of wind generation for the region. So then, following insights from hydrological drought modelling, we calculate the demand net of renewables for the region of interest as demand minus wind generation on each day. And then you can accumulate this over 7 days and then calculate the wind drought peak demand index by scaling this accumulated demand net of renewables using its long-term average and standard deviation. And then we identify the events as the times when this index exceeds its 90th percentile. And then the duration of an event is the length of time that it exceeds this percentile, and the event severity is the shaded area between the index and the 90th percentile line that you can see shaded here. So then to estimate solar electricity generation from solar radiation, first calculate the daily average solar radiation and surface temperature for the land grid cells over a region, and then use these to calculate the solar capacity factor using the solar models from Bloomfield et al. So you can read off the associated grid cell capacity factor for each day from the solar radiation and temperature. Then to calculate the kind of regional daily solar generation, multiply the factor in each grid cell by the installed solar capacity weighting, aggregate this over the whole region, and then multiply by the regional total installed solar capacity. So similarly to for the wind, we take into account the potential location of solar panels, and then we assume total installed capacity in the UK of 100 gigawatts and 800 for Europe, and then repeat this for each day to calculate the daily solar for a region. So then the surplus generation index, to calculate this, we find the renewables net of demand, which is wind generation plus solar generation minus demand on each day, and then calculate the 7-day accumulated demand net of renewables by aggregating this over each 7-day period. And finally, calculate the surplus generation index by scaling this by its long-term average and standard deviation. Similarly to with the wind drought index, you can then identify events as the times when the index exceeds its 90th percentile and calculate the event durations and severities, but now focusing on summer, so between April and September. So we can apply this method to identify adverse weather scenarios in any suitable gridded meteorological data sets. And then this allows us to produce tables like the one on the left, summarising the historical wind drought peak demand adverse weather events that were identified in the ERA 5 data. So we can see that the most extreme historical UK wintertime wind drought event occurred in November 1989 and lasted for 17 days. I think I'll hand over to Megan now.
That's great. Thanks, Isabel. As ERA 5 is limited to a 40-year period of the observed historical conditions, we wanted to use some additional data sources in order to better represent climate variability and climate change. So the idea is to capture the potential for more extreme conditions that could have happened in the past but didn't by chance, but also to consider what might happen in the future warmer climates. So in order to try and answer these questions, we identified adverse weather events in 2 additional data sources. So this was the Met Office Decadal Prediction System known as Depressis, which is a hindcast data set, and the UK CP18 Global Climate Projections. So Depressis is a global ocean atmosphere model where simulations run freely for many model months to produce truly new outcomes away from the observations. So the simulations are run 40 times for each 12-month period starting in November, and this is done for each year between 1959 and 2015. And this provides us with 40 times more data than is available from the observations, giving a total of 2,280 model years. And as you can see from the plot on the right, Depressis, which is shown in the light grey, is capable of sampling more extreme events than is available in the observations, which are shown in the dark grey. So in order to produce projections of future climates, we use general circulation models. These models have a global coverage and, similar to models used for weather forecasting, provide us with data on weather parameters at a range of spatial and temporal resolutions. The UK CP18 global projections provide us with daily and monthly data from 1900 to 2100 for 13 variables at a 60-kilometre resolution with global coverage. They are formed from 28 projections, 15 of which are from the Met Office Hadley Centre model, and 13 are from other international climate modelling centres. Next slide, please, Isabel. Thanks. The global projections were chosen for this project over the other UK CP18 products because they are suitable for capturing large-scale features and changes, which is relevant for long-duration events. The projections are also spatially and temporally coherent, meaning that any spatial or temporal relationship between the variables is captured. Also, because this data is already at the same resolution as the Depressis data, this made the computational processing easier and more compatible. Unfortunately, the raw data output for solar radiation was not available from the CMIP models, so that was the 13 other international modelling centres, so only the 15 Met Office projections have been used in this project. The final choice we had to make was about the RCP, the representative concentration pathway. The purpose of the RCPs is to capture uncertainty associated with the economical, social, and environmental factors that will influence the extent and rate of climate change in the future. RCP 8.5 is typically used when exploring risk-adverse scenarios, as it is the highest emission scenario captured within UK CP18, and that's what we've used for this project. The daily surface air temperature, wind speed, and solar radiation variables were then used to calculate energy demand, wind generation, and solar generation using the same methodologies previously mentioned. So the Depressis hindcast data is available for surface temperature and 10-metre wind speed. This was bias corrected using ERA 5 data using a variant scaling approach in each grid cell separately for each month of the year. However, we also needed 100-metre wind speed in order to do the calculations. So therefore, a statistical regression model that was trained on ERA 5 was used to scale the Depressis 10-metre wind speed to 100-metre wind speed. We also needed daily solar radiation, which isn't available from Depressis. So a separate statistical regression model, again trained on ERA 5, was used to estimate daily solar radiation from other meteorological information separately for each month across the regions of Europe. We also bias corrected the 10-metre wind speed from the UK CP18 projections using ERA 5 using the same variance scaling approach. We then also used a statistical regression model to scale the 10-metre UK CP18 wind speed to 100 metres. More detail and validation of the calibration and imputation of the data will be available in the report that will be published with the dataset. Thank you. So this is a box plot of the UK wintertime wind drought peak demand events, showing the duration and severity of events selected in each year using each of the 3 data sources. The same information is presented in the right-hand corner scatter plot with the duration on the x-axis and the severity on the y-axis. These plots show us that the depressus, represented in green on the plots, does indeed capture events that are more extreme than in the historical record. They also give us an indication of how events may change over time, given the assumptions and methodologies used within this project. And again, as per the previous slide, similar plots for the other event types will be available in the report we will be sharing.
Great, thanks guys. So the final kind of part of this then is to take all of those events that we've identified in each of the 3 data sources, so ERA 5, depressus and UK CP18, and use them within an extreme value analysis to actually quantify how extreme different events are. So we use this analysis to first of all quantify and assign extremity to the adverse weather scenarios. So that allows us to say an event with a duration of 14 days will occur on average once every 50 years in this particular warming level. And then secondly, we can then use that information to select the relevant adverse weather scenarios to share and include within the final data set. So if we know that this a 1 in 50 year event is 14 days long, we know that we should be capturing and sharing events of that duration to represent that return level. So in order to assign extremity to the different events, we fit a statistical extreme value distribution to the thing that we're trying to kind of quantify, which here is the event metrics. So what duration or what severity is associated with what return level. So for example, here we have a histogram of the UK winter wind drought durations. So this is basically showing you how many events there are of each different kind of range of durations. And what the what we do is fit a statistical extreme value distribution, which is essentially this black line here. It's a kind of statistical function that we fit to the data above a high threshold, and it kind of allows us to kind of model what's going on kind of above that threshold. And what we can then do is plot that function in a different way to give us this return level curve. And what the return level curve shows us is the extremity of an event expected to occur for a range of return periods. So we've got different return periods along the x-axis. And then if we read off of the graph, it tells us what the kind of return level or the event duration is for that particular return period. So for example, a 1 in 20 year event, according to this model, would be about 14 days long. And the model also gives us a kind of uncertainty around that as well. And so in this example, I've fitted this model to just the ERA 5 data. And because we only have 40 years of data, we get a huge amount of uncertainty in our very high return levels. So if we wanted to try and represent what's a 1 in 100 year event, we've got this enormous kind of range of values that could take according to the model because of our very short record of data that we're using. So this is the real advantage of using the depressus data. Not only does it sample events that are more extreme than those that we saw in the observed record, it also gives us that huge sort of 2,000 years of data, which means we have many, many more events that we're modelling. And so now when we draw our return level curve, we have much greater certainty around what is the 1 in 100 year event, because we have 2,000 years of data, so estimating the 100-year return level event, it can be done with quite high certainty now. And as well as that, as well as using the depressors data to reduce the uncertainty in our estimates, we also want to use the UKCP18 data and the events that we identified in that data to capture the effect of climate change on the events. And so to do that, what we did was fit what's known as a non-stationary extreme value distribution. So rather than saying all the events are the same throughout time, and we fit one single curve like this, instead we say that the events are able to vary in time, and so you get a different return level curve for every different time step. And we do that by conditioning on global mean surface temperature within the extreme value distribution. And here's just a graph of what global mean temperature looks like in the future and in the historical period. So to do this, we then fit these extreme value distributions to all of the events that we identify within each of the 3 data sources, so ERA5, Depressus, and UKCP18. And if you want to read more about this approach, there's lots of more information about it in the report that's coming out, but also it's based on the approaches taken by Brown et al. In their 2014 paper. And so what this ultimately gives you is for each different kind of region and event type. So here, just as an example for UK winter wind drought peak demand events, you get a return level curve on the left for duration and on the right for event severity. And this basically shows you for all the different kind of return periods of interest, what is the associated return level. And there's a different curve for each warming level, and that's created by doing this conditioning on global mean temperature. And so this allows you to make statements such as a UK winter wind drought expected to occur on average once every 50 years. And you can kind of read off of the graph by kind of drawing a line up on the 50-year part, but it has a duration of 16 days. With an uncertainty range of around 15 to 17 days, and that's consistent across the warming levels in this case. And then in terms of severity, it has a severity of about 10.2 in the current day climate, so the orange curve, but a slightly lower value of 9.3 in the 4-degree climate. And so this analysis, and again, this is repeated for each of the different regions and event types, but this gives you the information that you need to then pick the events out of the data, of the Depressus data, to make up the final data set. So it basically tells you if you want to pick out an event that represents this event in terms of duration, in terms of the 1 in 50-year return level, then you should be sharing an event that is 16 days long. And so we use this information to select events to represent each of the different adverse weather types, so winter wind drought, summer wind drought, and summertime surplus generation events in each of the different regions. So the events are kind of characterized in terms of how extreme they are in terms of the UK or Europe as a whole, but the data is shared for all of Europe in each case. And we do this for a number of different extreme levels, so the different return levels that I've explained before, and then in terms of both duration and severity of the event. And this is done for as many warming levels as are different or distinct for a given event type, region, return level, and metric. And I'll explain what I mean on the next slide. And then in each case, we select and share 3 scenarios from the Depressus record. And I'll just give an example here of how we do that. So in terms of here, the UK winter wind drought peak demand events, in terms of severity, we look at, so here we have that same return level curve as was on the previous slide, but here is a table kind of summarizing that curve for the specific sort of 6 return levels we're interested in and the 5 warming levels we're interested in. And so what we do is for each return period, so for each column of the data frame, we identify which warming levels are distinct. So an example of this is here, if we focus on the 1 in 100 year return level, what I did was looked at whether the best sorry, I should explain here in the number outside of the brackets here is the best estimate of that return level for that warming level. And so that's basically representative of the solid lines in this plot. And the numbers in the brackets are then the uncertainty around that coming from the statistical model. And so when we're trying to identify the distinct warming levels, what we did was said that if the best estimate of the return level is within the uncertainty range of a previous warming level, then it can be classed as being contained within that same warming level. Whereas in this case, we can see that the best estimate for the 4-degree warming level is outside of the uncertainty range of the current day climate warming level. And so that is a distinct warming level, and we share separate events for that warming level. And so then for each of these distinct warming levels, we select 3 adverse weather scenarios that span the uncertainty range of the event metric. And so here we have back the scatter plot of event durations and severities in terms of these winter wind drought peak demand events in the UK. And so, for example, for this warming level, the range is 9.7 to 10.4. And so we would pick out events that occur within this kind of range. And we do that such that they kind of span the range of values in duration and severity. And then finally, another thing we did was we've also shared the 3 most extreme events within the depressors record within the final data set to kind of really realise the potential of those kind of physically plausible, more extreme events that depressors is representing. So then finally, here's just kind of to demonstrate what some of those events look like. So here we have the UK, we have a kind of selection of wintertime wind drought peak demand events selected for the UK to represent different extreme levels in terms of duration for the final data set. And what this is basically showing is the wind drought index. So as Isabel explained, how we calculate that. And an event occurs when it peaks over its 90th percentile. And so this blue line here is that kind of adverse weather threshold. And so each of these events are where that demand net of renewables is exceeding that threshold for a number of days. And you can see how the different extreme levels here represent different kind of sizes of these exceedances. But this basically shows how kind of including events across multiple extreme levels and spanning the range of the event metric really gives you quite a nice diverse range of scenarios with different kind of behaviours and patterns going on, which would be really relevant for electricity system resilience testing using the data set. So then just to summarise again, this is the slide I showed at the beginning, but this is what we're releasing and what the data set contains. So I think that's it in terms of the development of the data set.
And we're 4 minutes ahead of schedule, so well
fab.
done there. So brilliant job there. I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat. If people are familiar with Microsoft Teams, you can also raise your hand if you want to ask a question verbally. So if you go to the top of the panel, you should be able to see a little thing with a hand like that. So if you want to ask a question now verbally, otherwise we've got a couple of questions we can get started on. There's a question here around, is the heating peak index, the 0.75 gigawatts per degree, assumed to be constant over time, Laura?
Yes, so that's kind of one of the things to note in this study, that we kind of devised a sensible setup for the energy system, and then it remains constant throughout the whole period. So we apply the same method across all of time. So yeah, that heating slope is the same. When obviously in reality it's likely to change. But I think the key thing was to come up with a sort of consistent method to identify these adverse weather events. So if you started changing that threshold over time, then you're not just capturing how climate is affecting the events, if you see what I mean. And we wouldn't then have a consistent approach across time for characterizing the events, which would then not allow us to pick out events at different extreme levels just based on the weather. It would then also be kind of conditional on what was this energy system set up. So I think we wanted to just isolate only the weather and climate is changing across time. Nothing in the electricity system is in this case. But as to whether the 0.75 gigawatt per degree slope is the best choice, that's another question. But we did do some work. We did a sensitivity study to explore how changing that affects the results of the analysis, and that's in the reports. So I'll definitely refer you to those. Something that we explored.
Okay, and the next question is from Hannah at Reading. If I understand you correctly, you only calibrate the 10-meter winds to error 5. Could this contribute to why DePressy gives the largest extremes? For example, if it is running slightly colder than the reality, demand could be higher.
Okay, no, so we calibrate DePress's 10-meter winds, temperature and mean sea level pressure, which is something that we used in the calculation for the solar. And then we ultimately also calibrated the solar that we estimated. So I think, and we do a lot of kind of validation of all of those different variables in the DePress's data. So I think we're quite happy that all of the DePress's data is reasonably well calibrated. I think it would be something I'd like to have more time to do, is explore the actual kind of physical weather that's going on behind some of those really extreme DePress's and UKCP18 events. Maybe look at some of the weather patterns that are occurring during them to see what's sort of driving them. But yeah, hopefully future work.
Okay, we don't have any more questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions? If you do, please raise your hands, or I will pause so you can speak now.
There's a hand up, Tom.
Oh, is there? I didn't see the hand.
Matthew.
Yes, come in if your hand is up, please. Please come in now.
Yeah,
I
thanks
can't see
for
the
the
hands
really
in the chat at the same time. Sorry, Matthew, carry on.
Yeah, thanks for the really interesting presentation. It's it's very interesting to see what we've been doing. Can you tell us a bit more about why you chose the 90% quantile, and how sensitive the results were to that? And sort of on that point, if you tried any hysteresis, because I guess one of the interesting things looking at those profiles you presented is that quite often you get these long duration events, but obviously they're not allowed to drop below 90%. So what if it could have dropped to 85% instead of 90% and so on? I just wondered if you'd done any sensitivity analysis around that sort of thing. Thanks.
Thank you. So the 90th percentile was chosen because that's what's often used in the sort of hydrological drought modelling community. That seems to be the sort of threshold of choice there. So we kind of went with that as well. Also, it's obviously means that sort of 10% of the days are extreme, and that's quite a standard sort of way of working with extremes. But I don't think we did actually vary that. So there were other thresholds that we kind of played around with in a sensitivity study. That was in our kind of initial report talking about the characterization of the events. So we tried, what if we accumulated over a different number of days, or that kind of thing. I think it's something, to potentially have a look at, because like you said, there are some events where you can see it might have dropped below that threshold, but it wouldn't have dropped below another threshold. So I think it's Sorry,
No,
go ahead, Emily.
sorry, I might be missing the question slightly, but I suppose that if the event is dropping below that threshold relatively quickly, then would that not be picked up by some of the ones with a shorter duration? So you wouldn't be missing those shorter duration 90th percentile exceedances, that they'd be just in a different data set. And of course, I suppose in terms of taking all of the different percentiles that you could take, there is some argument to just limiting it to something. But yeah, are they picked up by the shorter duration events?
I'm not sure.
It does sound like that would be likely, Emily, doesn't it? And don't forget, one of the things that we, I suppose in my head, how I quantify this and think about this is that the events that we're actually pulling out are, first of all, they're very long duration, and secondly, they're very severe, especially in those longer duration events and the longer return period events, which it means that you do need to have some. I suppose we do need to have some qualification of what constitutes an event to feed into that index. But I can imagine that the shorter events would come out as some of the shorter return period events as well.
I guess my feeling about it is that you would, if you change that threshold, all the events would sort of increase in duration or severity if you drop the threshold, and so then you'd end up with sort of equivalent results. You'd have the same events being the same extremity compared to other ones, but just the actual absolute value of duration and severity might change.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks
but
very
it
much.
might be something to explore. Thank you.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
It's a really interesting point to explore. So, Alistair from EDF, you mentioned that adapting the method from an existing hydro drought modelling method, is it easy to combine the data sets with existing hydro modelling, for example, for Norway and other interconnected countries for the UK, so that you can link it to hydro resources? It's a really interesting question there.
So my thinking is straight away probably, as in, are you asking if there is sort of precipitation available coherently with the data? Do you think that's what's?
Yes. So can we look at hydro modelling? I think that's a really interesting question from perspective of extending the project, actually, because you're right. Actually asking the question, what is the problem? What is the return period of this event, and also that's coincident with a drought event over Norway, could be really good questions to ask the data sets.
Yeah, and I think it could be feasible to try and develop some method for representing the hydrological conditions at the same time, potentially, in the same way we've done estimated solar.
Yes, it would be quite challenging because you're going to have to model the sort of snow pack and how it melts as part of that hydro question, aren't you? But certainly, it would be relatively. It would need a couple of new techniques, I think, but well worth thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to a question from Nicolo from I think from the Energy Systems Catapult. If a user wanted to model a specific weather event, i.e. a 1 in 10 year event, would it be possible to get multiple yearly time series for that specific event from the data set?
So what we've done is we've shared 3 different events to represent each return period. So, and they're kind of, they have quite different characteristics potentially, but all are kind of captured within that return period. So there are 3 different ones for each at the moment shared.
The other useful thing I think about the different return period events is being able to test that sensitivity in terms of how more extreme is a 1 in 10 year event from a 1 in 5 year event versus a 1 in 10 year event and a 1 in 20 year event? And are they only incrementally different, or are they very different? So I think that's quite an interesting aspect that could be tested here. I noticed that Colton, you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks for the presentation. I just had a quick question about the return level plots. So I was wondering that when you're considering the climate impacts, are you only looking at the full timescale, so 2100, or have you looked at all at how these kind of return level plots evolve through the years to that 2100 time frame and climate impact?
So the way that it works is each event within each of the different data sources has an associated global mean temperature. And so for the UK CP18 events, the global mean temperature is taken from whichever year in the record that event occurred in. And then you basically model, as I showed in that kind of histogram, you model those events, but you say that function can change depending on the global mean temperature. And so there's no time within the model. It's just what was the temperature, the global mean temperature at the time when that event occurred. And so then that allows you to draw those different curves for each of the different warming levels. So then you kind of take time out of it completely and just look at if the world was 2 degrees warmer, then this is what the events look like. If the world is 3 degrees warmer, this is what the events look like. And it doesn't matter what time that warmth is reached in the future. It's just the warming level. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So then I guess in theory, if we wanted, we could go through the RCP pathways and find a corresponding temperature rise to
exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's sometimes more useful to people in terms of rather than doing 2050 at the different RCP pathways, because that sort of 2 degrees, that sort of notion that, I mean, I think a lot of it's coming from advice through CCC and others, you know, of planning for 2 degrees but stress testing to 4 gives you that sort of flexibility. So Rebecca says, could these methods be used to produce data sets for other events, for example, heat waves?
Yeah, I definitely think they could be. You'd want to develop, I guess, a different sort of index to do that, but a similar approach could absolutely be used. Yeah.
I mean, we've used this technique in the nuclear sector actually to look at extreme heat events as well. So, and it's also been used to look at flooding events in the UK. So very similar techniques being applied using similar data sets.
I'm kind of interested what Rebecca's asking that question. What the application is there, in that the heat as a component of the demand model is to some extent in there, but is this a sort of very separate application? Is it still in energy modelling? I'd be interested to hear from Rebecca if she's still on the line.
Okay, we'll let Rebecca respond to that. So, but let's go to David's question here. Quick point on the hydro Norway question. The temperature could be critical there for spring snowmelt. He agrees with Emily, with apologies for pushing a slightly dated paper. So if you look in the chat and you're interested in that question, David at Reading has kindly popped up a paper on that. Rebecca, are you still there? Did you want to comment on that, or does anyone have any more questions at this stage? I don't see any questions. I don't see any hands. So let's move on slightly ahead of time. That's not a bad thing being 10 minutes early. So Gareth just asked, will the slides be available? Yes, we will. So I'm stealing my thunder for the last slide of the show. So yes, we'll make the slides available. There's also a report which we're finalising over the next couple of weeks. No, don't be sorry, Gareth, it's great. There'll also be a report that will be available over the next couple of weeks once we've finished the review process, and we'll steer you towards those at the end of this session. So now I'm going to hand back over to Laura and the team, who are going to talk us through how you can access the data sets.
Oh, what am I doing? Oh no, press play. Have I? Oh, there we go. Okay, so accessing the data. So as we said, we'll share these slides with everybody, and they will contain these useful links to the data. So it's been published on the CEDA archive, and so we've just got some links to the project page, the dataset page, the data repository itself we can download the data from. You also need to register for a CEDA account to be able to download the data, which is really quick and easy to do. So it's just a link for that. Some information on downloading data from CEDA, and then also CEDA's YouTube channel. But I'll pass over now to Isabel, who's pre-recorded a nice little video for us around how to access the data.
The dataset is stored on the CEDA archive website. This is the project page for this particular dataset. You can read the abstract here for the overall project. And then if you scroll to the bottom, go on related records, datasets, and then more info, then it takes you to the dataset page, which then contains an abstract about the dataset itself. And then if you click on details/docs, continue scrolling, there's some information about the rules for accessing the data, some more information about the dataset. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, then you can access even more information about the datasets in the linked documents. So there's information about UK CP18, Depressus, the two datasets which we used to create this one. And then you can access the previous reports written about this project, and the report for the most recent work will also be available once it's been published. Now, to access the data itself, if you scroll back up on the dataset page, click on download, and then it takes you to this page. So there's a separate folder for each of the event types. So the summer surplus ones, summer wind droughts, and winter wind droughts. Then there's also a README file about the licensing. So if you click on that, you can find out more about the licensing of the data. And then there's also this README file here, which describes the naming convention and file structure for the dataset in more detail, so you can read all about that. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of this README, it also gives an example of the metadata that the files contain, so you can see all the information about each file, which will be available to you. If you want to download the data for a summer surplus generation event in Europe that would occur 1 in 100 years, characterized by duration, then you would click on the summer surplus generation folder, the Europe folder, and then return period 1 in 100 years, click on duration, and then the events were consistent across warming levels for this type of events. There's just one folder for that. And then there's 3 different events which are available for this category. So then say you want event 1, click on that, and then you download each file for each of the variables out of solar, temperature, and wind speed. And to download, you just click the download button here. Then to get back to the original page, you can just click on data here, And then for another example, if you wanted to download a winter wind drought event in the UK for a 1 in 5 year event characterized by severity and 4-degree warming, what you'd do is you'd click on the winter wind drought folder, and then UK return period 1 in 5 years, severity, and then this folder here for 4-degree warming. And then say you wanted to look at event number 3 of 3, here you go. These are the net CDFs for you to download. To download the data in bulk, you can click this button here and then it gives you the download options. And for more information on this, you can contact CEDA. You can also click on the help button at the top of the website and then download data from CEDA archives, and takes you to the kind of help section of the website with more information on how to download. And then there's also the CEDA YouTube channel, which has lots of help videos. We can put the link to this in the chat or email it to you later. But yeah, here is some more examples on how to use the website, and specifically there's a video here on how to find a specific data set that you're looking for on the CEDA website.
Great, thank you. Should we have a bit of time for any questions on that?
I mean, and just to say on the data availability, this is all going out as a under OGL license, so it's a very unrestricted use for downstream modelling. So and it's available on the CEDA site alongside other data sets like the UKCP data sets, just to make it as widely available as possible for further studies and using the data sets. So does anybody have any questions on access, specifically accessing the data sets and being able to use them?
Did you have anything else to add?
Yeah,
I was going to mention as well that I'm involved in a hackathon that's happening in a couple of weeks. It's sort of being organised by University of Reading and University of Oxford, and we're going to be hopefully using this data set in anger during that week. So I can also hopefully have some sort of useful code maybe in there for kind of reading the data into different places in the next couple of weeks, and also we'll have some user experiences and be able to kind of make sure it's all working smoothly.
Okay, excellent. Is there anything anybody else wants to add? So Alistair saying, thanks to NIC, CCC for sponsoring the project and making it available, and the Met Office for all the hard work. Yeah, thank you, Alistair. So hopefully this will be really useful to people now moving forward, and we're looking forward to seeing how these data sets can be applied over the coming months and years. So yeah, thanks for that comment, Alistair. Shall we move on back to the slides and just talk through the next step slide, and then we'll just pause at the end and just see if anybody's got any other questions or thoughts to finish up on. Isabel, can you bring up the slides again? So yeah, as you've seen, the data is now available. So it's currently available via CEDA, and after this this session, the project team will circulate the slides probably this afternoon. So I think I've got everybody's email addresses. So everybody on this call, and in fact everybody who expressed an interest, will send through the PDF version of the slides this afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, the project team is also in the final stages of finalising the report for this work. Obviously, we're making sure we take it through a fairly rigorous review process. It's been a little bit waylaid this week by COVID, but hopefully we're going to get this out the door in the next couple of weeks. And one thing I'll commit to do, we'll make sure we email this group, this list, when that's happened, and point you at the NIC web pages where the report will be published. I'm also going to suggest, but I haven't discussed it with Joe, that we might include some elements of this meeting, the recording that we've just made, next to the report as well, so that if people want to access that, then that would be great too. We've got a second stage or a third stage of this project that's just ramping up, dare I say it. So that's looking at, yes, Emily, that's looking at short duration events, so ramping events predominantly, and looking to produce some similar data sets for that. So if you're particularly interested in those shorter timescale events, then let us know, and we can let you know how that's going as it progresses. And one of the things I appreciate about these kind of meetings is that they're pretty full on and sort of heavy on information. So if you're reflecting over the next couple of weeks and you come up with more questions, then please do get in touch with us, because I mean, ultimately ourselves at the Met Office, but also the team at NIC and CCC want to make sure that these data sets are as useful as possible. So, you know, we're really happy to engage and answer those questions as you have them over the next few weeks and months even. So please do get in touch with us if you do come up with questions once we're finished this afternoon. Does anyone have any final thoughts or questions that they want to ask? I'm conscious we're a little bit early, but I'm really happy to give people back time. I'm always really happy to get back time. So, but does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and there's no hands going up. Are there any final thoughts or additions that any members of the team, the Met Office team, or Joe and Owen, you want to add at the end?
Not for me, no. Thanks, Tom and team, and thanks for user group or the user group members to engage in this. Cheers.
Yeah, so on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for everybody for coming this morning. And yes, I really appreciate the people giving up their time this morning to hear about this work. And we look forward to hearing more from people as you pick up and use the data sets. And please let us know as you're using them. It'd be great to see how, you know, for all of us, we're really keen to know how useful these data sets are and where they're being used to inform, you know, research and various studies by the different people represented here today. Thanks ever so much, everybody.